Hi, Babushka. Oh, so I know you've been training a lot at your new job, and I know you find it kind of frustrating at times. It's a lot to take in. I understand that. This song is symbolic, by the way, of the turning point in my life as a teenager. So we're going to go back here to 1988 and 1989. This song is The Long Way Home from Breakfast in America by Supertramp. Now, Supertramp, if you go back in Old English terms, it's a meaning for a type of train, an advanced train. Important stuff. Actually, this album right here used to belong to your Uncle Jack. And I'll tell you how I got it and how it was so important to me. Because at this time in 1988, by the way, I was wanting to be a waitress. I was concentrating on wanting to work at that certain diner I told you about. Very popular place, and I had been checking in with the waitresses almost every week. Finally, a young woman who had been working the swing shifts there had decided to put in her notice and move away. And these old school waitresses decided to take me on. And it was important. My guardians were a little bit confused because they thought with the Social Security that I was getting, and at the time, I thought I was getting that little bit of money every month because of my mom's death, and I was wrong. And I can tell you a little bit about why later on in another story. But I know it's hard learning a new thing with a new job, and you have a lot to take in, and you might be nervous. But I'll tell you, if I can learn something new, so can you. I was never a communicator with people. I was oftentimes very awkward and shy. And because I was the fourth child and the baby, oftentimes I would have to wait my turn, and sometimes my turn wouldn't come along. I was slow at everything. I was slow at reading. I was slow when riding a bike. I actually couldn't ride a bike without the training wheels till way late, till I was about, I don't know, I'd say 9 years old, even get confident on it at the age of 10. My brothers and my sister oftentimes had their turns first. And Mom was so busy with all of that, my needs were put aside. I didn't mind. I was slow of a lot of things too. I remember your father would actually comment on it, and I would get teased about it too as a young adult. I walk slow unless I'm working. I take my time with it. And I think a lot of that has to do with how my dad, your grandfather, would walk with his canes and braces. You'd have to slow down with him. and it just became a habit. So, you know, when I'm comfortable and oftentimes when I want to concentrate or think, I walk slow and I try to absorb everything around me and think things through. Maybe that goes back to my childhood, my girlhood, on how to think and deal with stress. Besides, wanting to be the Hausfrau, being comfortable in a shelter where I can sit and think. I used to do that often as a child. I would actually hide underneath tables or in cupboards. Some people would think that I would be missing and they would scurry around looking for me and then they would find me. I'd just be wanting to be left alone and playing, having my me time. And also, with all the redundancy and negative stuff going on in the household, oftentimes I would just want to retreat and hide. There's other reasons for that too. But we're going to move on with this story. Oh, by the way, those rose hips and those dried petals that I've been sending you over the past couple of years, I know last year I sent you a whole bunch of it. That tea rose bush, it's very big and very old. A company bought the property of the old apartment complex where that rose bush was right on the corner. And it was kind of a free-for-all for everybody to pick. And I kind of took over the task on my own to trim it down and maintain it. But they cleared out, oh gosh, I think, the beginning of the summer during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic crisis over in this area, they finally got around to tearing down those buildings and then hauling the stuff away. I was in shock because they tried trimming down the rose bush, but it kept growing. So, actually, the day before yesterday, I was talking with some construction workers who were working there. I had to run out and get an errand done. But I told them, that I wanted to retrieve the rest of the bush to dig it up. And a nice young man about your age offered to do it for me. He got about halfway done. But I was out there actually earlier this evening digging up the rest of it. And so I'm going to transplant it. Actually, I was planning on this, and the apartment manager here where I live said it was okay to transplant all of it along a fence in the yard. And since it's so pokey and spindly, it'll grow up huge, and it'll actually work as a barrier, and that'll protect us, in case there's people wanting to prowl around. We've had those problems in the past. So, everything kind of works out, doesn't it? Yeah, everything kind of works out in a way. But sometimes it can take a while. It may take a while, like having to regrow a rose bush. A few years back, I went on a special vacation. Actually, Francis took me along the Oregon coast. He had never, ever been to those areas. He had always taken the main freeway if he was ever traveling from Washington down into California, the main I-5 freeway. But he had never taken an old highway called Highway 101. An incredible, incredible journey because it goes all the way from Canada. And it almost seems like a windy, windy road. Sometimes it takes forever. But it's the long way down. And it continues on and on and on and on down. into California, and then that way you can make it down, down, down even further on into Mexico. But Francis had never taken the journey around the coastline there. And I'm like, we gotta do this. You gotta see this. This is incredible. Especially when you cross over south across the Columbia River. Huge river. Absolutely incredible. And very beautiful. You take a huge bridge. It's the best, almost like a roller coaster ride. And it's a good thing. It's a wonderful thing. But basically, the Columbia River serves as a border between Washington State and Oregon State. And then along the highway, you see these small, small, tiny seaside towns. You know, a beautiful thing. You know, home of areas of the Nicanni and the Tillamook from back in the day. And then there's a famous mountain around that region called the Nicanni Mountain. Legend has it from old school stories that in that particular area it's a beginnings of humanity. But as the saying goes, it's not part of the landscape. I wanted to go to an area, and I was actually able to show this area to you when you were a little girl, because all these towns are closely connected to each other. But I wanted to show you areas like Newport and Tillamook. But when I was married to your stepfather, there was one place that we missed out on, and I wanted to show it to you, even though you were really little, because when I was a little girl, it meant a lot to me. A little town called Gilgamesh. It's known for its crabbing, and it's also known, built in a landscape like a slope of having a huge giant lit up letter G. And the place was built, the township, actually, the town was established around 1929. Now the founder, he had named it Gilgamesh as a symbolism to his favorite hero. And I always thought that was incredible. And like I was saying, that giant letter G, to this day, you have the Coast Guard and you also have the Navy who use that bright letter because they can see it far away in the sea. They can use that as a point of reference in order to make it back to the coastline to safety if they're way out in the ocean, and pilots oftentimes when they fly over, they can see that letter G, and it's a good thing because it helps them navigate when they're traveling and trying to get things done. But we're going to go into a story about Gilgamesh with me and your grandfather John, my dad. It's one of my earliest memories when things were going well for the family. And there's actually a little photo that I have of me. I was about the age of 3 or 4, and I'm tiny, and I'm walking next to my dad, and he's walking with his canes and braces, and we're outside. We're actually in this town. It was a wonderful vacation where I actually have a lot of clear memories about, bits and pieces, but they're pretty clear from my childhood. And it was at that time I was learning how to run and play. It's a magical, magical place to me. I remember seeing the crabs up close when I was a child, and I remember that the area there with the water, there wasn't much of a beach. It was all rocks with a long, long bridge connected with pieces of wood and rope, kind of rickety going across it. But I remember doing that with my sister. I wanted to go back. So, like I was saying, some years ago, Francis took me on a special trip, and I was able to see that area again. It had changed a lot. In the 70s, there was more action there, and the population was a little over 1,000. Now the population, I think, maybe in the mid-2000s, maybe 2010 or 2011, the population went down to about, say, 700. It struggled because it had two main in its heydays. And in the 70s, this was starting to deplete because of outsourcing and what have you. Its main, part of employment, its main employment stuff, had to do with crabbing and fishing, and also two main wood mills. Now, there's still a huge smokestack there, but it's abandoned. But it was a main thing with one of the mills during the height of its time. Going there on the vacation, I was able to soak in memories. To me, it was almost magical, even though today it kind of has that aura of a dying town. But Francis could kind of see how it meant a lot to me. And then walking along the boardwalk there, it was important. And he started doing a little bit of research about the letter G and why it was built. And I would tell him, my father told me amazing stories about this letter G, that it was actually built by a bunch of school kids. They had done a town trip back in the 20s to another town in another state that had a giant letter A, and they wanted to do the same thing. So, the teachers and a lot of the elders in that area helped them build it. But they made the mistake of building it at first with mostly wood, and then there was a fire which destroyed it. So one of the owners of one of the main mills there decided, we're going to rebuild this. And he helped the school kids again. And this time they used iron. And that keeps it stable. So no matter what, even if that town's going through a struggle, the communities around it, and maybe some of the bigwigs out in Portland, they'll do what they can to keep this letter going, to keep it burning. It's an important thing. But I was visiting one day around 1989. Okay, this is springtime, about the time I decided to call it quits with that so-called fiancé of mine I told you about, named Jason. I was angry. I was angry at the world. And at the time, too, I was struggling with the feelings inside of me about being in the closet and not realizing what it was. That maybe today I might define it as demisexual. Maybe back in the 80s, before they could define it even further, it might be considered bisexual. Okay, but I did not feel normal. But I should have felt normal because these were normal feelings. It's funny how things work. And it's funny how things get defined and redefined over time. But I was visiting my dad, and it was over a weekend where I spent the night. He offered that I be able to sleep upstairs in the old room that used to belong to your Uncle Jack. Actually, it was still his room. He still had his stuff in it. All his posters, all his albums, and the twin bed that he actually used to share with Eddie. Eddie had moved out of that room and eventually into an area near that was open between, I don't know, the upstairs had 2 bedrooms. In between the 2 bedrooms was an area called an alcove, and that was a temporary room for a while for Uncle Eddie. Now, I had moved out of the downstairs guest room after your Aunt Jewel had moved out of the house. I think I was about in the 3rd grade, and it felt wonderful. I got her room that was upstairs. It was a wonderful thing for me. I felt more like a big kid. But then later on, when I was going through puberty, I regretted it because my room was near the rooms of my brothers. Now going back to Dad. He had offered that I either sleep upstairs in Jack's room or that I could maybe sleep in my room if I found extra blankets or a sleeping bag, because my room had been long abandoned and the bed had no sheets on it. It was just an old mattress, and it was kind of empty and hollow. He thought I wouldn't be comfortable there. And I'm like, that's okay. I'll either grab some blankets and sleep up there, or I'll sleep on the couch. No problem. So, I look around my room. It's empty. Then I open the door into Jack's room. Had all his stuff in it. He was away finishing his military school. I thought about my memories with him that were good. When I was a little girl, he was my favorite sibling. We used to love wrestling together, and oftentimes if there were, I don't know, sibling rivalries of taking sides, I would always take his side with everything. After the ordeals, the misery that he put our mom through, poor Sarah, I was thinking about the things that we used to share. We also shared music together, all those bands. We had those things in common. But the little turtle inside of me grew really, really, really angry at that moment, hanging out in his room and staring at everything. And I did something bad, but oh well. I figured at the time, compared to what he did to Mom, I thought about every time he did something wrong. Every time he abused Mom, I counted 5 times, 5 times, 5 fingers. So for every time he did some kind of abuse toward her, I took one of his records and I took him with me. And maybe to this day he could think that Eddie took them. But they're here. So in the future, if he ever sees these videos, he'll know where they are. And he'll know that if he wants them back, he's got to pay. And I'm right here waiting for him. And, if him or his daughter ever question you about it, go ahead and tell him for me. Right here. I'm not going anywhere. So anyways, so I'm looking at those albums. I take the albums. Think it must have been early in the morning. Yeah, it was. Come to think of it, it was early in the morning. Your Uncle Eddie was actually living there, and I think it was his senior year in high school in Humbleton. I remember him actually, he was going out with his friends, and it was in the morning, and I was glad to see him go. And then I had time, to talk with my dad. And all we had in the house really to eat was cold cereal or oatmeal. And I decided to make some oatmeal for Dad. And we were talking, and I was asking him questions. Actually, asking him questions about what went down. And I was angry too, because I was going through one of the china cabinets of knickknacks, and I actually found my old baptismal candle here. Yeah, it's still got the old burn mark on the wick from my baptism, and how I was so angry and pissed off, not just because of the battle that Mom went through when she was angry on how I was treated during that whole ordeal of the divorce, but how I was angry at my father. And it turned into an argument. All during the breakfast time. And it turned into screaming and yelling, and also crying. And I kept asking him about why things had changed. I could see more why. Because he had not gone through his terrible ordeals. He had not thought them through, the things that he went through as a child, and seeing how his mom was treated, especially at the hands of his grandmother, and how that was all a facade. Then he popped up a question as I was starting to light a cigarette. So it was early in the morning. He's like, let's go to the coast. So we ended up doing a long drive together. And we kept arguing with each other. But as we drove and went further and further out through the windy roads, it started to calm down. And we ended up going to that area of Gilgamesh together. At the same time, at school, I was starting to study about the story of Gilgamesh and that hero and where it all came from. And I was thinking about that epic poem. I'm going to quote it to you here real quick because I think it's important how a lot of things can be connected in our lives. And a lot of people think of this as a form of prayer or something to meditate on. It's a heroic story. And you can also find it on audio too. I would really recommend it to you. But this is one of my favorite quotes from it. How long does a building last before it falls? How long does a contract last? How long will brothers share the inheritance before they quarrel? How long does hatred, for that matter, last? Time after time, the river has risen and flooded. The insect leaves the cocoon to live but a minute. How long is the eye able to look at the sun? From the very beginning, nothing at all has lasted. Here's another quote that I love, and reading it actually reminds me of my girlhood, because around that time of 3 or 4 years old, actually around the time I remember having a particular dream in that little seaside town. Let me read you this quote. It's amazing. The dream was marvelous, but the terror was great. We must treasure the dream, whatever the terror. For the dream has shown that misery comes at last to the healthy man. The end of his life is sorrow. Says a whole lot. I loved my dad. I really did. We made it to that little town. And we decided, because we didn't finish all of our oatmeal, he used to call it mush. That's actually an old Great Depression term, because that was one of the main meals that he would have as a child, because living with his mom, they were so dirt poor. He considered it during that time in 1989 as a comfort food that would calm him down. When he was a little boy, until he started living with his grandparents, he knew what poverty was, you know? So in that little town, we decided, because with our argument, we didn't finish breakfast at his place, you know, my old house where I used to live. We decided we'd go out for breakfast. And we did. And we calmed down a little bit, and we talked while we were eating our meal. It's just so funny. The things, when people argue, oftentimes when you calm down and go over the argument together, you pick through things, and then you see beyond what you were arguing about, and as to the who, what, where, when, and why. And he was angry at me because he wanted me to forgive your uncles. He wanted me to set all those horrible things aside. I didn't get mad at him, but I did point out some facts, things that he did not see going on in the home, besides Mom being hurt. Your Uncle Jack's room would creep me out. It went beyond his teasing me or, all those times against Mom. There was actually an incident with a young woman. We're going to go back to 1985 here. A young woman and her sister and their family. They were outsiders, I believe from an area near Portland. They had moved into the town. Their mom had recently divorced and remarried, and then had another child, a little baby sister, a little sibling. They had moved into the town. The two girls, one was my age, the other one was your Uncle Jack's age. Very beautiful young women. I would consider the older one very beautiful. And I can see back in my girlhood going through puberty, she may have been one of my first crushes. And all the boys looked at both of them and loved them. They were just, a couple of hot peppers. But the oldest one, she went out horseback riding with one of my cousins, teenage girl about her age. And they were playing around, I guess, and riding the horses really hard and trying to do some trick riding. Well, they ended up colliding into each other. I remember this time. And I remember the ordeal. It was in a summer, probably between 1984, before the school year. Gosh, I must have been about 11 going on 12. That young girl ended up going to the hospital. It was a big to-do. She ended up having some form of intense concussion. Maybe it could have caused some brain damage. It took her a while to recover. After she had healed and then started going to the high school there, I remember clear as day now. And I was fighting with my dad about this. Well, not really fighting, but I was raising my voice in the restaurant, and he kept waving his hands at me to calm down, to calm down. I said to him, "Did you know that young woman, she was invited over to her house, and you were out with your friends at the tavern? And Jack was there with a couple of his buddies. And she was in his room. Eddie was there too, but he didn't partake in it. They heard her. I could hear it, 'cause I was across the way in my bedroom sleeping. They raped her. They did something. I think they may have gotten her drunk. They did something to her. In the beginning, apparently, at school and stuff, she was friendly toward them. All of them, including my oldest brother, and loved the attention. After that incident, she didn't communicate with him ever again. And I saw this. I saw this go down. I heard it go down. I saw the aftermath. I saw the body language. And I heard it all. And it scared me to death. I'm glad I have those albums. Because I actually ended up taking one more. Because I considered that form of abuse a reason to take one more. So instead of 5, there's now 6. So, my dad loved me. And he was in denial of it. He had so much invested in the success of his sons and made so many excuses for them. And it was hard for him to face the reality of those situations, the reality of those decisions, and how he did not intervene or discipline them or reach out to other adults, other father figures or mother figures who could have stepped in and helped. And then his upbringing back in the day, a lot of that stuff was not addressed. It was seen as a normal to do. They twisted all against her, by the way, later on, and considered her a whore, that it was her fault. I remember hearing those conversations and jokes, in private. I remember hearing all that. And I was angry. I was angry in the restaurant on how that affected me. I accidentally slipped up and came out of the closet to my father. And that scared him to death. He saw it as a sin. And that made me feel extra guilty. And it also made me feel like there was something wrong with me. Made me feel like this turtle here, that part of me, should stay within its shell. Very uncomfortable. And then seeing how he looked upon my brothers, I had this false notion, in a way, that maybe I could figure out a way to forgive them both. And I also had this false notion, and I didn't realize the facade there, that it was all nothing but sidestepping bullshit, a form of dog and pony show, especially when you have siblings, in the society we live in today that compete against each other. I thought maybe, if I do my best in school and if I'm successful, I'll get a little bit of the attention, the same attention that my dad was giving to my brothers, that he'd give some to me too. I didn't realize that it was all a waste of my time, actually, till around the time I divorced your stepfather. It's funny. But yeah, the argument. We ended up finishing breakfast. Dad didn't want to talk about it anymore. We went over to the car, and when we drove over to that small windy bridge, Then he got out of the car. He couldn't walk out there. It was impossible. And we were in such a hurry, we actually forgot to bring along his wheelchair. Usually on long trips like that, we would put his wheelchair in the trunk. That way we could have it to wheel him to places where it was hard to walk. But we forgot. But he wanted to see me walk across that bridge and look around. And I did. I got to the end. I went down a stairway and I walked across the rocks there near the water. I could see the crabs crawling. I didn't crack the crab this time, but I caught him off guard. We never talked about it much, We even had a hard time talking about things that we used to share, stuff like chocolate. If I would bring up, yeah, you like chocolate as much as me, huh, Dad? It would end up meaning something else, and he'd get really embarrassed and really scared if we were around other people. Isn't that hilarious? But yeah, an amazing place. The founder of that area of Gilgamesh, that land was actually given to him by President Ulysses Grant back in the day after the Civil War. This was a Civil War veteran, this founder of that town. Just a beautiful place. So I hope you found this story interesting. And in the past, I have sent you the famous cheese that's made around that area, especially, Tillamook. It's famous for its cheese. It has that cooperative of the farmers that live there. It's a great place to tour. And someday, if you and your husband are out here, we should do a trip over there. I think it would be fun. Cheese is one of your favorite foods, right? I think we would have a great time. But, yeah, afterwards, the trip home from that particular day in Gilgamesh, you could call it a long way home. We didn't talk much. I think my father and I had a lot to think about. And he felt like he owed me a little something, something. Well, in the next couple of videos, I'll explain to you how he got me out of my shell to communicate better, and how he helped me with the job that I wanted to have. And it helped him in a way too. It was a form of healing, even though it was just a little bit. At that time in my life, I felt like that little bit was better than nothing. I should be winding up this video. You're going to be fine out there, sweetheart. And yeah, it's a new adventure. You're going to be great once you get settled in and get to know the people. And remember, and I'm sure you already are, take notes on stuff. Just keep a notepad and pencil with you. Doesn't have to be, the computer in your phone. And then that way you can keep up with things. And remember to ask questions. It's good to ask questions. But I do love you. And I will talk to you later. I gotta get going here. I just finished up cleaning. I've been working a lot. Putting in some overtime. And then me, along with some others, we've had to put our foot down at work too. and that's okay. That's part of the job, and that can be a learning experience as well. And then I think I'm going to rest for the rest of the week here, as much as I can, because I have vacation beginning in a few days, and I want it to be a productive vacation. I'm going to be learning, and I'm going to be organizing some of my place here, especially my room. I'm going to go through a lot of stuff down in my storage, like my fabric and what have you. I think I'm going to make something, because the holidays are right around the corner. Okay, I'm going to let you go now. I'm going to get off on a tangent again. Take care, and I'll talk to you later, okay? Oh, and don't forget to ring the bell. Talk to you later.